There is a place where the knowledge of 3 civilizations converged in a single point. A place where the botanical secrets of Egypt, the medicinal wisdom of Greece, and the alchemical formulas of the East merged into manuscripts that promised something extraordinary. The regeneration of the human body through plants. That place was Alexandria, and that knowledge was declared forbidden. In the year 48 BCE, flames consumed the largest library humanity had ever built. 700,000 manuscripts burned in a single night. Among them was a sacred herbarium containing original studies of plants brought from the Nile, India, and Greek temples where priests healed without cutting the skin. But not all was lost. Among them was a sacred herbarium containing the original studies of plants brought from the Nile, from India, from Greek temples where priests healed without cutting the skin. But not everything was lost. Some guardians managed to save fragments. Papyrus scrolls rolled up under their robes, formulas memorized in the dark, recipes passed down from master to disciple in the utmost secrecy. For 2,000 years, this knowledge traveled hidden through persecuted alchemists, silent monks, and herbalists who risked their lives to preserve what Rome wanted to destroy. 12 sacred plants, elixirs that purified the blood, oils that the Egyptians considered tears of the gods, formulas to awaken what they called the inner fire of the cells, and a revolutionary vision. Revolutionary vision that disease is not an invasion, but disharmony, that the body is not a machine, but a temple, that healing does not come from outside, but from remembering what nature has already sown in us. Modern science is rediscovering these secrets. Recent studies confirm what the Alexandrians knew millennia ago. The plants they revered activate longevity genes. Their formulas reduce inflammation at the cellular level. Their sacred oils repair what seemed irreparable. This is the herbalist who was not supposed to survive. The knowledge they tried to erase from history, and someone saved it for you to find. Chapter 1. The 12 Plants of the Sacred Papyrus. My name was lost over the years. It no longer matters. What matters is what my hands managed to save that night, when the sky over Alexandria turned orange and the smoke from 700,000 manuscripts obscured the stars. I was a scribe at the museum for 43 years. I copied texts that came from Babylon, from Persia, from the lands where the sun rises earlier than anywhere else in the world. My fingers touched papyri that had been written 1,000 years before my birth, and my eyes read secrets that Egyptian priests had kept since the earliest dynasties. When the flames began to devour the shelves, I knew I could not save everything. No man could. So I did what any guardian of knowledge would do in his last act of service. I chose. I chose what humanity could not afford to lose. Among all that was burning, I ran to the section that we librarians called the papyrus garden. There were kept the texts on plants, not plants as decoration or food, but plants as medicine, as transformation, as resurrection of the sick body. And among all those scrolls, I looked for one in particular, the oldest, the most complete, the most forbidden, the papyrus of Ebers. This manuscript was written 3,500 years ago when the pharaohs still walked like gods among men. It contains 877 remedies. But what few people know is that at its core are 12 plants that the priests considered sacred, 12 plants that were not simple herbs, but keys. Keys to open doors in the human body that disease had closed. The first of these plants is garlic. The Egyptians called it the stinking rose. What seems like an insult was actually a name of power, because this rose, which no perfumer would want near their bottles, had a capacity that no aromatic flower possessed. It cleansed the blood. The slaves who built the pyramids received daily rations of garlic, not for its taste, but because it kept them alive under the murderous desert sun, carrying stones that weighed more than 3 men combined. Today, science has discovered why garlic contains a compound that is activated only when you cut or crush it. It is called allicin, and this substance does something extraordinary in the body. It awakens dormant genes that command cells to repair, cleanse, and regenerate themselves. The Egyptians did not know the word gene, but they knew the effect, and that was enough. The second sacred plant was a golden root that arrived in caravans from the east. Merchants brought it, wrapped in cloth to protect it from the sun. Priests called it the blood of the earth. Today we know it as turmeric. The Ebers Papyrus wrote, "For wounds that would not heal, for joint pain, for when the body seemed inflamed from within." 3 millennia later, modern laboratories isolated its active ingredient, curcumin, and discovered that this molecule does something that few natural compounds can do. It crosses barriers, enters where others cannot, reaches the interior of cells, and silences the signals that produce chronic inflammation. That invisible inflammation that we now know is the root of almost every degenerative disease. The third plant was small, black, insignificant to the eye, but the papyrus called it by a name that still makes me shudder when I pronounce it: the seed of blessing. Later texts would call it the seed that cures everything except death. It is Nigella sativa, black cumin. The pharaohs were buried with jars of its oil. They have been found in 3,000-year-old tombs, perfectly preserved. Why bury a king with seed oil? Because the Egyptians believed that he would need it on his journey to the afterlife, that even the gods used this plant to remain immortal. Modern science has identified more than 100 active compounds in this small black seed, but one stands out above all others: thymoquinone. Recent studies have shown that this compound has properties that would have made the priests of ancient Egypt smile. It protects the liver, calms the immune system when it attacks itself, and regenerates damaged tissue. The sacred papyrus listed 12 plants. It protects the liver, calms the immune system when it attacks itself, and regenerates damaged tissue. The sacred papyrus contained 12 plants, and I managed to memorize each one before the fire turned them to ash. Chapter 2. The Egyptian Formula for Purifying the Blood. Among the papyri I managed to save that night was one that did not belong to any official collection. It had no library seal. It was not catalogued in the museum's records. It was a small scroll, the size of my forearm, wrapped in linen so old that it fell apart when touched. I had found it 20 years earlier, hidden behind a false wall. It was a small scroll, the size of my forearm, wrapped in linen so old that it fell apart when touched. I had found it 20 years earlier, hidden behind a false wall in the section that held the medical texts of Imhotep. Someone had deliberately hidden it there. Someone who knew that certain knowledge should not be available to just anyone. When I unrolled it for the first time, it took my eyes a while to understand what they were seeing. It was not a philosophical treatise, it was not a hymn to the gods, it was a recipe, a precise formula, with exact quantities, with step-by-step instructions. And its title, written in hieroglyphics that few could decipher anymore, simply said this: to return the blood to its original state. The Egyptians believed that blood was the river inside the body, a river that had to flow clean, unobstructed, without impurities. When this river became polluted, disease appeared not as an external invasion, but as a natural consequence of a dirty channel. Medicine was not about attacking the disease, it was about cleaning the river. Once clean, the body healed itself. This philosophy is 3,000 years old, and yet the most advanced science of our time is coming to exactly the same conclusion. What we now call chronic inflammation, what we now identify as accumulated toxicity, what we now measure as oxidative stress, the Egyptians simply called dirty blood, and they knew how to clean it. The formula on the hidden papyrus contained 4 ingredients, only 4. But the combination was precise, the order was specific, and the method of preparation followed a ritual that was not superstition, but science disguised as ceremony. The first ingredient was garlic, but not the fresh garlic we use for cooking. The papyrus specified garlic macerated in darkness for 40 days. The priests called it black garlic, although the process was not the same as we know today by that name. It was garlic fermented in clay pots sealed with beeswax, buried underground where the sun could not touch it. This fermentation process transformed the compounds in garlic. The aggressive allicin was converted into milder substances with a deeper action, compounds that we now call aloe. Cysteine, which modern studies have shown to cross the blood-brain barrier. That is, they reach the brain clean, where others cannot clean, protect neurons, and repair oxidative damage in the most delicate organ of the human body. The second ingredient was honey, but not just any honey. The papyrus required desert flower honey collected during the waning moon. For centuries, historians dismissed this detail as religious superstition until modern analysis revealed something fascinating. Honey collected during certain lunar phases has a different enzymatic composition. Bees modify their production according to the cycles of the moon. What seemed like magic was meticulous observation of nature over generations. Egyptian desert honey contained properties that European honeys did not possess. Pollen from plants that only bloom in extreme conditions. Resins from trees adapted to drought. Antimicrobial compounds. The papyrus also mentioned that the honey had to be stored in a special container made of clay and covered with a layer of sand. This was to prevent the honey from coming into contact with the air, which would cause it to spoil. Honey from the Egyptian desert contained properties that European honeys did not possess. Pollen from plants that only bloom in extreme conditions. Resins from trees adapted to drought. Antimicrobial compounds so powerful that honey has been found in 3,000-year-old pharaonic tombs. Perfectly edible, without bacteria, without fungi, intact. The third ingredient was wine, but the papyrus called it herbal wine or wine of the 7 plants. It was wine in which specific herbs had been macerated for a full lunar cycle. Rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano, mint, inojo, and a 7th plant that the papyrus described as the leaf that calms the frightened heart, probably melissa or torangil. The wine was not for intoxication, it was a vehicle for extraction. The alcohol dissolved the medicinal compounds from the herbs and made them bioavailable. The priests did not know the word tincture, but they had invented the process 3,000 years before modern herbal medicine rediscovered it. The fourth and final ingredient was black seeds, Nigella sativa, but ground at the time of preparing the formula. Never before. The papyrus was specific about this. The seeds had to be whole until the moment of use, because something in them was lost on prolonged contact with air. Something volatile, something essential. Today we know that the essential oils in black seeds oxidize quickly, that thymoquinone, their most powerful compound, degrades when exposed to oxygen. The Egyptians did not have spectrometers, but they had something better. Thousands of years of observation, generations of healers, who noticed subtle differences and passed them on to their apprentices. The preparation followed an unalterable order. First, black garlic crushed in a stone mortar, then honey added slowly while mixing in circles. Then the herbal wine poured in the exact amount. Finally, the freshly ground black seeds added at the end to preserve their potency. The dose was small, 1 tablespoon each morning before the sun touched the horizon for 40 days. The number 40 appears constantly in Egyptian texts. 40 days of mummification, 40 days of priestly purification, 40 days for the blood to complete its renewal. Modern science has confirmed that red blood cells live for approximately 120 days. In 40 days, a third of the blood has been completely renewed. The Egyptians did not count cells, but they had calculated the exact time to notice a profound change in the body. This formula was passed down from generation to generation. The first step was to crush black garlic in a stone mortar, then slowly add honey while stirring in circles. Next, herbal wine was poured in the exact amount. Finally, Freshly ground black seeds were added at the end to preserve their potency. The dose was small, 1 tablespoon each morning before the sun touched the horizon for 40 days. The number 40 appears constantly in Egyptian texts. 40 days of mummification, 40 days of priestly purification. 40 days for the blood to complete its renewal. Modern science has confirmed that red blood cells live for approximately 120 days. In 40 days, a third of the blood has been completely renewed. The Egyptians did not count cells, but they had calculated the exact time to notice a profound change in the days. In 40 days, a third of the blood has been completely renewed. The Egyptians did not count cells, but they had calculated the exact time to notice a profound change in the body. This formula survived the fire because it lived in my memory and now lives in these words. Chapter 3. The Greek knowledge that Alexandria absorbed. Before the flames devoured the library, Alexandria was the point where all rivers of knowledge flowed. Ships arrived from Athens loaded with philosophers, caravans from Persia with astronomers who read the sky as others read words. Emissaries from India brought mathematics that would take the West centuries to understand. But no knowledge transformed our understanding of the human body as much as that brought by the Greeks. I was young when Dioscorides arrived at the library. He had served as a doctor in the Roman armies, traveling through territories that most men would never see. In every place he set foot, he studied the local plants and spoke with healers from forgotten villages. He learned from elderly women who knew remedies passed down from time immemorial. He collected not only plants, but stories. When he settled in Alexandria, he brought with him a manuscript that would change medicine forever. He called it Materia Medica. It contained descriptions of more than 600 medicinal plants, but it was not a simple catalog. It was a system, a way of understanding how each plant affected each organ of the human body. Dioscorides taught that the body was not a uniform mass of flesh, but an orchestra of organs, each with its own function, each with its own vulnerability, each with its own allied plants. The liver had its herbs, the kidneys had theirs, the nerves responded to specific plants that other parts of the body ignored. For the liver, Dioscorides prescribed milk thistle with its white spotted leaves, which the Greeks believed were drops of milk from the goddess Hera. This plant had a special affinity with the organ that the ancients considered the seat of dark emotions. Anger lived in the liver, bitterness fermented there, and milk thistle cleansed not only bile but also accumulated resentment. Modern science has isolated a compound in milk thistle that is effective in treating liver disease. Dioscorides prescribed milk thistle with its white spotted leaves, which the Greeks believed were drops of milk from the goddess Hera. This plant had a special affinity with the organ that the ancients considered the seat of dark emotions. Anger lived in the liver, bitterness fermented there, and milk thistle cleansed not only bile but also accumulated resentment. Modern science has isolated a compound in milk thistle that is effective in treating liver disease. Anger lived in the liver, bitterness fermented there, and milk thistle cleansed not only bile but also accumulated resentment. Modern science has isolated a compound in milk thistle called silymarin and has shown that it protects liver cells from toxic damage and stimulates tissue regeneration. The liver is the only organ capable of complete regeneration, and silymarin accelerates this process. The Greeks did not have microscopes, but they observed patients for decades. They saw how wine drinkers who took milk thistle lived longer than those who did not. For the kidneys, Dioscorides recommended dandelion. Roman soldiers urinated constantly when they took this herb, but behind the mockery was recognition. Dandelion caused fluids to flow from the body, cleansing the ducts that the Greeks imagined as irrigation channels. When these channels became blocked, the body swelled, and dandelion opened the floodgates. Today, studies confirm that this plant has powerful diuretic effects, but unlike pharmaceutical diuretics that rob the body of potassium, dandelion replenishes it naturally. The Greeks did not know about electrolytes, but they knew that their patients did not weaken with this plant. The Greeks did not know about electrolytes, but they knew that their patients did not weaken with this plant. For the nerves, Dioscorides kept his most delicate prescriptions. He understood that the nervous system was like a network of invisible threads, connecting every part of the body to the command center in the head. When these threads became irritated, the pain traveled along paths that did not correspond to any visible injury. Valerian was his main remedy. He called it pu, imitating the sound his patients made when they smelled the root, because the smell of valerian is unpleasant. But the effects compensated for any discomfort. Soldiers who could not sleep after battles found rest. Women, whose nerves kept them in constant tension, finally relaxed their shoulders. Valerian acts on what we now call GABA receptors in the brain. It is the same system that modern anti-anxiety drugs manipulate, but the plant does so without creating dependence, without the drowsiness that synthetic drugs produce. Dioscorides also brought knowledge of Iberian. The Greeks used it for wounds that would not heal, but they also prescribed it for melancholy, the darkening of the mood, the shadow that fell over certain people for no apparent reason. This yellow plant, which blooms when the sun is highest, seemed to bring light into the body. Melancholic patients reported that the darkness dissipated and that they regained their interest in life. Today we know that St. John's wort contains compounds that affect serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. It works as a natural antidepressant. The Greeks treated melancholy 2,000 years ago with an herb that modern psychiatry is only now beginning to take seriously. All this knowledge converged in Alexandria, where it was mixed with knowledge of the ancient Egyptians, who had been using it for centuries. The Greeks treated melancholy 2,000 years ago with an herb that modern psychiatry is only now beginning to take seriously. All this knowledge converged in Alexandria, mixed with Egyptian wisdom, and merged with Eastern traditions. I copied many of those texts, and those I couldn't copy, I memorized. Chapter 4. The Green Fire of the Alchemists. In the basements of the library, there were rooms that few knew about. They did not appear on official maps, or were mentioned in public records. To access them, one had to descend narrow staircases carved into the living rock, barely lit by torches that cast more shadows than light. There, the alchemists worked. Most people believe that alchemy sought to turn lead into gold. This is a simplification that the alchemists themselves encouraged, because while the curious and the greedy were obsessed with precious metals, the real work was happening in secret. Alchemy did not seek to transform metals, it sought to transform life itself. Zosimus of Panopolis was the master of those basements. Egyptian by birth, Greek by education, mystic by soul. His texts mixed precise instructions with visions that seemed like dreams. He spoke of snakes biting, their tails, eagles descending into the abyss, kings dying to be reborn. But behind each symbol was a real process, a concrete technique, a method that worked. Zosimus described something he called green fire. It was no ordinary fire. It did not burn the skin or consume wood. It was an inner fire, a vital energy that dwelled in all plants but remained dormant until someone knew how to awaken it. Extracting this fire was the supreme art of the botanical alchemist. The process began with the selection of the plant. Not just any specimen would do. Zosimus taught that plants collected at dawn contained more fire than those cut at midday, that herbs grown in rocky soil concentrated more power than those in fertile soil, and that the time of harvest had to coincide with specific phases of the moon. Every detail mattered. Once the plant was selected, the extraction began. The simplest method used wine as a solvent. The plant was immersed in wine for weeks, sometimes months. The alcohol extracted the soluble compounds, the active ingredients, what Zosimus called the plant soul. The result was what we now know as tincture, but alchemists called it the plant spirit, captured in liquid. For more powerful extractions, Zosimo developed distillation techniques. He built glass and copper apparatus that heated the mixtures until they turned into vapor. This vapor traveled through winding tubes that gradually cooled it until it became liquid again. But the resulting liquid was not the same as what had gone in. It was purer, more concentrated, more powerful. Distillation separated the essential from the incidental. It left behind the coarse matter and retained only the subtle. The final product could be 100 times more potent than the original plant. One drop contained the strength of 100 leaves. This concentrate was green fire in its purest form. Zosimus documented specific extractions that still amaze us today. He distilled rosemary oil and discovered that a few drops on the temples relieved headaches that no other remedy could touch. He extracted the essence of juniper and noticed that it cleansed the kidneys with an efficiency that the whole plant could not achieve. He concentrated the power of mint until he obtained a liquid that numbed pain on contact. Modern pharmaceutical laboratories use exactly the same principles: extraction with solvents, distillation, and concentration of active ingredients. The difference is that today we use stainless steel machines instead of copper stills, but the process is identical. Zosimus perfected it 18 years ago in the cellars of Alexandria. There was another process that Zosimus kept for his most advanced disciples. He called it calcination. It consisted of burning the plant until it was reduced to white ashes. Most would think that this destroys all medicinal value, but Zosimus knew something that modern chemistry would confirm centuries later. The ashes contain the minerals of the plant in their most bioavailable form. Fire eliminates the organic and leaves the purified mineral. These ashes were then combined with tinctures extracted from the same plant. The result was what Zosimus called the complete medicine. It contained both the spirit and the body of the plant, both its compounds and its essence. These ashes were then combined with tinctures extracted from the same plant. The result was what Zosimus called the complete medicine. It contained both the spirit and the body of the plant, both its organic compounds and its minerals. It was the whole plant, elevated to its highest expression. I spent years watching Zosimus work. He never allowed me to touch his stills, but he let me watch, he let me listen, he let me copy his texts when arthritis no longer allowed him to write, and when fire consumed the library, his knowledge already lived on in my memory. The green fire did not die with Alexandria. It traveled hidden for centuries. It reappeared in medieval monasteries, where monks prepared medicinal liquors. It resurfaced in Paracelsus laboratories. It transformed into modern phytotherapy, which today rediscovers what Zosimus already knew. The vital essence of plants can be extracted, it can be concentrated, it can be administered in ways that multiply its healing power. This knowledge was never really lost, it was just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. Chapter 5. Illness as disharmony. Among all the wise men who walked the corridors of the library, there was one whose ideas haunt me to this day. Not because they were the most practical, not because they offered immediate remedies, but because they completely transformed my understanding of what it means to be sick. His name was Herophilus, and his view of the human body was so revolutionary that many considered it heresy. Herophilus was the first to dissect human bodies systematically. At a time when touching a corpse was a religious taboo, he obtained permission from the Ptolemies to open the bodies of executed criminals. What he discovered in those dissections changed medicine forever. He mapped the nervous system, identified the brain as the center of thought, and distinguished arteries from veins, but his most profound discovery did not come from the scalpel, it came from contemplation. Herophilus observed that the body functioned like an orchestra. Each organ was an instrument. The heart set the rhythm with its steady pulse. The lungs blew like flutes, filling and emptying in regular cycles. The stomach percussed with its Contractions. The intestines snaked like bass strings. The liver resonated with deep bass notes, and the brain directed everything from its bone podium. When this orchestra played in harmony, the result was health, a state of balance, where each organ performed its function without interfering with the others, where the rhythms were naturally synchronized, where the melody of life flowed without obstacles. But when one instrument was out of tune, disease appeared. This was the revolutionary idea. Disease was not invasion. It was not divine punishment. It was not bad luck. It was simply disharmony, an instrument playing out of tune, a rhythm interrupted, a note held too long or cut off before completion. The physician was not a warrior fighting invisible enemies, but a tuner. His job was to identify which instrument had lost its tone and return it to its correct frequency. Not to attack the disease, but to restore harmony. Not to combat symptoms, but to rebalance the entire system. Herophilus developed an art he called sphygmology, the study of the pulse. He would spend hours with his fingers on his patient's wrists, feeling the heartbeat transmitted through the arteries. He identified dozens of different pulses, fast and slow pulses, strong and weak pulses, regular and irregular pulses. Each type indicated a specific imbalance. A pulse tense like a lyre string, too tight, indicated excess internal heat. A pulse as loose as a string without tension signaled a deficiency of vital energy. A pulse that jumped like a nervous musician revealed emotional disharmony. Herophilus could diagnose illnesses just by feeling the pulse for several minutes. Traditional Chinese medicine developed an almost identical system. Independently, Chinese doctors also identify dozens of qualities in the pulse. They also diagnose imbalances through what they feel under their fingers. Two civilizations separated by thousands of miles came to the same conclusion. The pulse is the music of the body made audible. Herophilus applied his musical theory to treatment. If an organ was hyperactive, playing too loudly, he prescribed plants to calm it, sedative herbs that lowered the volume. If an organ was weak, barely audible in the bodily symphony, he prescribed stimulating plants, herbs, that strengthened its voice. Inojo tuned the stomach. Valerian silenced nerves that were too noisy. Ginger lit digestive fires that had gone out. Each plant was a tuning instrument, and the herbalist was the technician who knew which one to use in each case. This vision has profound implications that modern medicine is only beginning to explore. If disease is disharmony, then health is not achieved by eliminating something, it is achieved by restoring balance. It is not a matter of destroying the bad, but of strengthening the good until the bad loses space to exist. Cancer, from this perspective, is not an external invader. It is the body, out of tune to such an extent that certain cells forget their original score. They begin to play their own melody, ignoring the conductor. The cure would not come from attacking those cells, but from reminding them of the symphony of which they are a part. Herophilus died centuries before I was born, but his texts survived in the library. I copied them all, memorized their most important passages, and when the fire came, their music survived with me. The body is an orchestra. Health is harmony. Illness is a false note waiting to be corrected. This truth has not changed in 2,000 years, and plants remain the most accurate tuning instruments that nature has given us. Chapter 6. The Body as a Luminous Temple. There was a man in Alexandria who belonged to no school and belonged to all. The Greeks considered him too Jewish. The Jews considered him too Greek. The Egyptians did not know what to do with him, but those who listened to him were transformed. His name was Philo, and his words lit a light in my understanding that has never gone out. Philo was not a doctor. He did not prepare remedies or study anatomy. He was a philosopher, but his philosophy touched on something that doctors had forgotten. The Body is not just flesh. It is not just organs functioning like machines. It is not just chemistry and biological processes. The body is a temple, and within that temple dwells something luminous that determines whether we live or merely exist. I remember the first time I heard him speak in the portico of the library. The sun was setting behind the columns, and his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. He said that human beings were a bridge between two worlds. The world of dense matter, of earth and water, of bones and blood, and the world of pure light, of divine thought, of the spark that animates all living things. This spark, Philo said, dwells in every cell of the body, not just in the brain or the heart, in every fragment of flesh. Each cell is a tiny lamp, carrying an invisible flame. When these lamps shine brightly, health glows. When they go out, disease sets in. And when they all go out at once, what we call death is nothing more than the temple being plunged into darkness. Modern science has discovered something that would have fascinated Philo. Every cell in the body emits light, real photons, that can be measured with sensitive instruments. Scientists call them biophotons. This emission increases when cells are healthy and decreases when they become diseased. Philo spoke of cellular lamps 2,000 years ago. It was not a metaphor, it was a direct perception of a reality that physics is only now beginning to confirm. For years I considered these words to be beautiful poetry, but useless for medical practice, until I began to observe something strange in patients. Those who maintained some form of spiritual practice healed faster. It didn't matter what their religion was. Jews who prayed, Greeks who meditated, Egyptians who performed rituals. They all shared something, an inner light, that seemed to fuel their recovery. Patients who had lost hope, who felt their lives were empty of meaning, got worse even though they received the best treatments. Their bodies had everything they needed to heal, but something was missing. That spark that Philo spoke of seemed to have been extinguished, and without it, even the most powerful herbs lost their effectiveness. I have seen young men die of minor illnesses simply because they no longer wanted to live. And I have seen elderly people recover from terrible ailments because something burned within them that refused to be extinguished. Philo taught that caring for the temple was a sacred obligation, not out of vanity, not out of fear of death, but because a neglected temple cannot sustain the light that dwells within it. The walls crack, the roof collapses. The flame goes out for lack of shelter. Caring for the body was then a spiritual act. Feeding it well, moving it, resting, breathing consciously. The walls crack, the roof collapses. The flame is extinguished for lack of shelter. Caring for the body was therefore a spiritual act. Feeding it well, moving it, resting, breathing consciously. All this kept the temple in a condition to house the divine. Plants entered into this vision as sacred offerings. They were not mere medicines, they were gifts from the natural world to keep the temple habitable. Every herb that healed the liver cleaned a room in the temple. Every root that strengthened the heart reinforced the foundations. Every leaf that calmed the nerves polished the crystals through which the light was to enter. Philo also spoke of breath. He said that every breath brought more than air. It brought spirit. The Greek word pneuma means both air and spirit. This is no coincidence. The ancients understood that breathing was the most spiritual act we perform. Thousands of times a day, without thinking, we invite the spirit into our temple, and each exhalation releases what is no longer useful, what the temple needs to let go of in order to remain pure. The Eastern traditions that reached Alexandria confirmed this view. Yoga practitioners spoke of prana, the vital energy carried by the breath. Taoists described qi flowing with each inhalation. Cultures separated by oceans had discovered the same truth. Breath is the bridge between flesh and spirit. I began to incorporate this understanding into my work as a scribe. When I copied medicinal texts, I added notes about the importance of intention in preparing remedies. An herbalist who prepares a tincture with reverence produces a different medicine. than one who works distractedly. The consciousness of the preparer is imprinted on the preparation. Philo was persecuted for his ideas. Too radical for traditionalists, too mystical for rationalists. But his writings survived because some of us recognized their value. I copied them. In secret, kept them alongside the medical texts because I understood that medicine without spirituality is incomplete. The body is a luminous temple. This is not poetic metaphor, it is an accurate description of who we are. And sacred plants not only heal the flesh, they also fan the inner flame that makes the flesh worth healing. Chapter 7. The Alexandrian Recipe for Longevity. In the oldest archives of the library, there was a section that we librarians whispered about as the wing of the immortals. Not because we literally believed in immortality, but because it held the texts of men who had lived impossibly long lives. Records of Egyptian priests who lived past 100. Testimonies of Greek sages who continued to teach long after their students had died of old age. Chronicles of herbalists who seemed to defy time itself. Among those texts was one that obsessed me for decades. It had no known author, no date, only a title written in ink that was once read and had turned brown with time. It simply said, "For those who wish to see their great-grandchildren." It was a recipe, and its ingredients were so simple that at first I doubted its value, but the years taught me that true wisdom often hides behind apparent simplicity. The first ingredient was pomegranate. The Egyptians considered it the fruit of the gods, painting it in the tombs of the pharaohs and sculpting it in temples. Priestesses used it in rituals of fertility and rebirth. But the text did not speak of symbolism, it spoke of daily consumption. A handful of seeds each morning, chewed slowly until the red juice stained the tongue. Modern science has discovered that pomegranates contain compounds called punicalagins. These act on the cells of the stomach lining, preventing the absorption of fat. A handful of seeds each morning, chewed slowly until the red juice stained the tongue. Modern science has discovered that pomegranates contain compounds called punicalagins. These act on the cells of the stomach lining, preventing the absorption of fat. A handful of seeds every morning, chewed slowly until the red juice stained the tongue. Modern science has discovered that pomegranates contain compounds called punicalagins. These act on the mitochondria, the powerhouses of each cell, protecting them from deterioration and helping them to function efficiently, even as the body ages. Damaged mitochondria are one of the main causes of cellular aging. Pomegranates keep them young. The second ingredient was figs, black, ripe, eaten fresh in season and dried the rest of the year. The text specified 3 figs a day, no more, no less. The Egyptians believed that figs contained the concentrated sweetness of the sun, that each fruit was a small deposit of edible sunlight. Figs are extraordinarily rich in minerals. Potassium for the heart, calcium for the bones, magnesium for the nerves. They also contain fiber that feeds beneficial bacteria in the gut. The ancients did not know about the microbiome, but they knew that those who ate figs regularly maintained healthy bellies into old age. The third ingredient was black cumin. The seed of blessing appeared. Again, but here the dosage was specific. 7 seeds every night, swallowed whole with a little honey before bed. The text warned that chewing them reduced their effect. They had to reach the stomach hole and release their power during sleep, when the body enters its deep repair phase. During sleep, the body repairs itself, cells regenerate, and damaged tissues are rebuilt. Black cumin enhanced these nighttime processes. Its active compounds circulated through the blood, while the body rested, reaching organs that during the day were busy with other functions. The fourth ingredient was fermented honey, not common honey. Honey that had been mixed with water and left in clay pots for weeks until it bubbled gently, what we would today call mead, but a mild version. Barely alcoholic, more medicine than drink. Fermentation transformed the sugars in honey into more complex compounds, created natural probiotics, and generated enzymes that raw honey did not contain. A spoonful of this fermented honey every day kept the digestive system populated with beneficial bacteria, and a healthy intestine, the ancients knew, was the basis of a long-lived body. The text included precise instructions on when to consume it: pomegranate upon waking, when the stomach was empty and receptive; figs at midday, when the sun was high and digestion was strongest; fermented honey at sunset, preparing the body for the night; black cumin just before bedtime to work during the hours of repair. There were also warnings. The recipe did not work if the body was full of heavy foods. It did not work if the mind was agitated by constant worries. It did not work if sleep was interrupted or insufficient. Longevity did not come from the ingredients alone. It came from a lifestyle that allowed the ingredients to do their work. I have known men who followed this recipe for decades. Not all of them lived past 100, but all of them maintained mental clarity until the end. All of them retained mobility in their bodies. All of them died peacefully without the debilitating diseases that destroy the dignity of so many elderly people. The recipe survived the fire because I memorized it word for word, because I practiced it myself in the years following the destruction, and because I now pass it on to those who have ears to hear and the will to act. Longevity is not an accident. It is patient cultivation. It is daily ritual. It is an alliance with plants that have accompanied humanity since the beginning of time. Chapter 8. The Elixir of Alexandria. For the immune system. Plagues visited Alexandria with terrifying regularity. They arrived on ships that docked in the port, traveled in caravans that crossed the desert. They hid in water, in food, in the breath of the sick. Every few years, death walked the streets of the city and took away thousands, but not all. Never all. And those who survived shared something that we doctors in the library studied obsessively. There were entire families who went through epidemics without losing a single member. Entire neighborhoods where the disease barely touched, while others were decimated. At first we thought it was luck, a favor from the gods, destiny written in the stars, but systematic observation revealed patterns, and those patterns always pointed to the same thing. Certain practices, certain foods, certain preparations that strengthen something invisible within the body. The Greeks called it physis, the Egyptians called it sa. It was the life force that distinguished the living from the dead, but more specifically, it was the body's ability to defend itself, to recognize what did not belong and expel it, to fight invisible battles against microscopic enemies that no one could see, but whose effects we all knew. In the library archives, I found a text that described a specific elixir to strengthen this defensive force. They called it the liquid shield, and its preparation required knowledge that combined Egyptian tradition with Greek sophistication and secrets that came from the East. The base of the elixir was wine, but not just any wine. Red wine from grapes grown in volcanic soils, fermented for a full year in unglazed clay amphorae. This wine had properties that ordinary wines did not possess. It was darker, denser, rich in compounds that stained the lips purple for hours after drinking it. Today we know that red wine contains resveratrol, a compound that activates cell survival genes. Grapes from volcanic soils, stressed by a lack of easy nutrients, produce more resveratrol as a defense mechanism. The ancients did not know chemistry, but they knew the results. Wine from certain regions provided better protection than wine from others. Resins were added to the wine, mainly myrrh, but also frankincense and a rare resin from Arabia called dragon's tears. These resins were slowly dissolved in the wine over 40 days, in sealed vessels, kept in cool, dark places. The resulting liquid had a bitter taste that few enjoyed, but its power was undeniable. Myrrh contains compounds that stimulate the production of white blood cells. Incense reduces chronic inflammation that weakens the defenses. The combination created a tonic that prepared the body for battle before the enemy arrived. It did not cure established diseases, it prevented them. It strengthened the walls before the siege. The elixir also included thyme honey, specifically from wild thyme that grew in the mountains where bees had no access to other flowers. This honey was darker than regular honey, almost brown, with an aroma that stung the nose slightly. The Egyptians valued it more than gold for medicinal purposes. Thyme honey is naturally antibacterial. It contains hydrogen peroxide that is slowly released upon contact with tissues. It also contains compounds from the thyme itself transferred by the bees that have antiviral properties. A daily spoonful of this honey kept the throat protected, the first line of defense against respiratory diseases. It also contains compounds from the thyme itself transferred by the bees that have antiviral properties. A daily spoonful of this honey kept the throat protected, the first line of defense against respiratory diseases. The last ingredient was macerated garlic, not the black garlic from the formula for purifying the blood. Fresh garlic, crushed and left in the resinous wine for the same 40 days of maceration. The garlic added its power to the mix, its ability to awaken the immune system from its slumber. The dose was small but constant. A sip of the elixir every morning during the winter months, when diseases proliferated. Half a sip during the rest of the year, never completely stopping. Protection required continuity. The shield had to be kept up. During the Great Plague that struck Alexandria when I was young, I observed those who took this elixir. Not all were saved, but the proportion was remarkable. Of every 10 who drank the liquid shield regularly, 8 survived. Of every 10 who did not take it, only 3 saw the end of the epidemic. Modern doctors talk about the immune system, describing T cells, antibodies, and inflammatory responses. They have accurately mapped what the ancients only intuited, but the practical knowledge already existed. The plants that strengthened the defenses were identified millennia ago. All that remained was to understand why they worked. The elixir survived with me. I prepared it 4 years after the fire. I shared it with those who deserved it, and now I pass it on in words so that those with wisdom can reconstruct it. Chapter 9. Sacred Essential Oils. Before writing existed, before men built stone temples, sacred oils already existed. The first priests of Egypt anointed the pharaohs with substances they considered to be tears of the gods. Golden drops, containing the concentrated soul of trees that had seen centuries pass. These oils were not perfumes to please vanity. They were medicines, they were portals, they were keys that opened doors in the body and spirit. In the library of Alexandria, there was a room we called the Sanctuary of Aromas. There they were kept in jars of pure gold. They were medicines, they were portals, they were keys that opened doors in the body and in the spirit. In the library of Alexandria, there was a room we called the Sanctuary of Aromas. There, ceramic jars, sealed with wax, were kept, some so old that the inscriptions on their surfaces could no longer be read. They contained oils that had been extracted generations ago and that miraculously retained their potency. Essential oil does not spoil like meat, it does not rot like fruit. If stored properly, it can last for centuries. Myrrh was the foremost of the sacred oils. The Egyptians called it punt, after the legendary land from which it came. It was extracted from trees that grew in arid regions, where rain was a rare visitor and the sun punished mercilessly. These trees produced a resin that bled from their wounds, hardening on contact with the air like petrified tears. The oil was distilled from this resin. Myrrh applied to wounds prevented putrefaction. Egyptian embalmers used it to preserve the bodies of the pharaohs for eternity, but doctors used it to preserve the bodies of the living. Wounds that festered healed under its influence. Advancing infections were stopped. Flesh that seemed doomed to gangrene recovered when myrrh arrived in time. Incense occupied the second sacred place. It came from the same territories as myrrh, from trees equally resistant to brutal conditions. Its smoke rose in all the temples of the known world. Frankincense occupied the second sacred place. Came from the same territories as myrrh, from trees equally resistant to brutal conditions. Its smoke rose in all the temples of the known world. Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, all recognized something divine in that column of aromatic smoke rising toward the sky. But frankincense oil had uses that went beyond ritual. Applied to the skin, frankincense oil reduced the signs of aging. Wrinkles were smoothed. Scars faded, and sun-damaged skin regained its elasticity. The wealthy of Alexandria paid fortunes for small bottles that promised visible youth. But the effect was not only cosmetic. The incense penetrated deeper, calming internal inflammation and relieving joint pain. Some doctors prescribed it for tumors with results that I still don't fully understand. Cedar was the oil of purification. The Egyptians built sarcophagi out of cedar wood because it repelled insects and resisted decay. The oil had the same concentrated properties. A drop in a bowl of water purified the atmosphere of a room where someone had died of a contagious disease. Doctors who visited patients with plagues rubbed cedar oil on their hands and chest before entering. Not all survived, but more survived than those who entered without protection. Blue lotus was the most mysterious of the sacred oils. It grew only in the waters of the Nile, blooming at dawn and closing at dusk. The Egyptians painted it in all their representations of paradise. They considered it the flower of enlightenment, the vehicle that transported the soul to higher states of consciousness. Blue lotus oil did not heal wounds or fight infections. Its power was different. It calmed the restless mind, induced vivid and revealing dreams, and relaxed tensions that no massage could reach. Priests used it before important ceremonies. Doctors prescribed it for patients whose illness seemed to originate in the spirit rather than the flesh, for deep melancholy, for terror without object, for insomnia that no herb could overcome. The extraction of these oils was an art that few mastered. It required infinite patience, tons of petals to obtain grams of essence, weeks of slow distillation so as not to destroy the delicate compounds. The master perfumers of Egypt kept their methods as family secrets, passed down from father to son for generations. In the library, I copied all the treatises on extraction that I could find. I documented the Egyptian methods, the Greek refinements, the innovations that came from Arabia. When the fire came, that knowledge traveled with me, not in bottles that could be broken, but in words that could survive as long as there was a mind capable of remembering them. The sacred oils have not lost their power. The plants from which they come continue to grow. The extraction methods continue to work. The only thing missing is the recognition that these substances are not aromatic luxuries, but ancestral medicines waiting to be rediscovered. Chapter 10. Solar Plants. There was a classification of plants that the herbalists of Alexandria kept with special reverence. They did not organize them by leaf shape or flower color. They organized them by their relationship to the sun. There were lunar plants that bloomed at night and preferred shade. There were terrestrial plants that grew regardless of the light they received, and there were solar plants, vegetables, that seemed to be in love with the sun, that followed its path across the sky, that only bloomed when its light was most intense, that absorbed something from the sun that other plants simply ignored. The Alexandrians believed that these plants not only captured light to grow, they believed that they stored the light itself, that each leaf was a small reservoir of solar energy that could be transferred to the human body when consumed. It seemed like poetry, it seemed like baseless mysticism, until modern science discovered biophotons. Every living cell emits light. Real photons, particles of light that can be measured with sufficiently sensitive instruments. This emission is not random. Healthy cells emit more light than diseased ones. Young tissues glow more than old ones. And most fascinatingly, this light can be transferred. When we consume plants rich in biophotons, that light passes into our cells. It nourishes them in a way that goes beyond vitamins and minerals. Calendula was the first of the solar plants. Its orange flowers opened at sunrise and followed the sun throughout the day, turning slowly like worshippers following their god. Herbalists harvested it at exactly noon, when the flower had absorbed the maximum amount of light possible. Drying it in the shade preserved what the sun had deposited in it. Calendula applied to the skin healed burns like no other plant. It seemed to restore to damaged skin the light that excessive sun had stolen from it. Consumed as an infusion, it brightened the spirits of the melancholic. The doctors of Alexandria prescribed it during the dark months of winter, when the sun was scarce and spirits were low. It was drinkable sun, it was light in liquid form. The Iberian was the second solar plant, also called St. John's wort in later times. It bloomed exactly when the sun reached its highest point of the year, at the summer solstice. Its yellow flowers contained a reddish oil that the ancients called sun blood. This oil stained the fingers of those who extracted it with a color that took days to fade. St. John's wort had a special affinity with the nervous system. It calmed damaged nerves, relieved pain that followed the path of the nerves under the skin. But its most notable effect was on the mood. People who had lost their joie de vivre regained it after weeks of taking St. John's wort. The inner darkness dissipated like clouds under the midday sun. Modern science has confirmed that St. John's wort contains compounds that affect serotonin. The neurotransmitter of happiness works like modern antidepressants, but without their side effects. The Alexandrians did not know about serotonin, but they knew about light, and they knew that certain plants could bring light to the darkest corners of the human soul. The wild sunflower was the third solar plant, not the huge sunflower we know today, which was domesticated centuries later in distant lands, but its wild ancestor with smaller flowers but concentrated power. This plant displayed the most dramatic heliotropism of all. Its stems visibly twisted following the sun, as if they had eyes we could not see. Wild sunflower seeds were prescribed for people whose vitality had faded. Elderly people who no longer wanted to get out of bed, sick people who had lost the will to fight, women who did not recover after childbirth. Something in those seeds rekindled the spark of life. It restored the hunger to live. It reminded the body that there was a reason to go on. The Alexandrians developed a theory that modern physics is only beginning to explore. They believed that the human body needed light not only in the eyes, but in every cell, that there was such a thing as light nutrition. The Alexandrians developed a theory that modern physics is only beginning to explore. They believed that the human body needed light not only in the eyes, but in every cell, that there was a form of light nutrition as important as material nutrition, that solar plants were the vehicle to carry that light into the body, where direct sunlight could not reach. This theory explained why people who lived in caves became ill even though they had enough food. Why did prisoners in dungeons first lose their minds and then their bodies? Why did the inhabitants of dark climates suffer from melancholy that the peoples of the south did not know? Light was food, and solar plants were the bread of that light. I collected these plants for years. I documented their optimal harvest times. I recorded the preparations that preserved their aluminum content. This knowledge traveled with me when everything else burned. I kept it as one keeps a flame in the midst of a storm. The solar plants continue to grow, continue to absorb light, continue to wait to transfer their brightness to those who know how to receive it. Chapter 11. The Alchemy of Mary the Jewess. Among all the sages who walked the corridors of Alexandria, There was one figure whom the men of her time tried to erase from history, not because her knowledge was false, but because she was a woman and because her discoveries embarrassed those who had spent decades searching for what she had found. Her name was Mary. Some called her Mary the Jewess. Others called her Mary the Prophetess. Later alchemists simply called her the Mother, because from her were born techniques that we still use today, without knowing whom to thank for them. I met her when she was an old woman and I was just beginning my service in the library. Her hair was white as the salt from the salt flats of the delta. Her hands were stained by decades of working with substances that left indelible marks, but her eyes shone with an intelligence that intimidated even the most arrogant philosophers. When she spoke, even the Greek masters fell silent. Mary did not seek to turn lead into gold. She despised those who pursued that chimera. For her, true alchemy was the transformation of plants into perfect medicines, extracting the essential, discarding the incidental, concentrating the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented instruments that allowed her to extract the essence of plants, extract the essential, discard the incidental, and concentrate the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented instruments that allowed her to extract the essence of plants, extract the essential, discard the incidental, and concentrate the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented instruments that allowed her to extract the essence of plants, extract the essential, discard the incidental, and concentrate the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented instruments that allowed her to extract the essence of plants, extract the essential, discard the incidental, and concentrate the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented instruments that allowed her to extract the essence of plants, extract the essential, discard the incidental, and concentrate the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented for her, true alchemy was the transformation of plants into perfect medicines, extracting the essential, discarding the accessory, concentrating the healing power to its maximum expression. And to achieve this, she invented instruments that no one had imagined before. The first of her inventions was the tribicos, a distillation apparatus, with 3 arms that allowed a substance to be separated into 3 different components simultaneously. Before Maria, distillation was crude, and much of the material was lost. The vapors escaped, and the products mixed together. The tribicos changed everything, allowing for precision, control, and purity that had previously been impossible to achieve. With the tribicos, Mary distilled essential oils of a quality that no one had ever seen before. She extracted essences from flowers that would evaporate on the first attempt with ancient methods. She captured aromas so subtle that they seemed to exist more in the imagination than in the physical world. The perfumers of Alexandria paid her fortunes for her extracts, but she used the money to fund research that mattered to her more than wealth. Mary's second invention was the keratakis, a sealed apparatus where the vapors of the substance being distilled could act on metals or plants placed on an upper tray. It was a chamber of transformation, an artificial womb where substances were married in chemical unions that produced offspring that neither parent could have produced alone. With the keratakis, Mary achieved extractions that simple boiling could not achieve. Compounds that did not dissolve in water or wine yielded to the vapors, concentrated in that sealed chamber. Alkaloids that remained trapped in the plant fiber were released and deposited on the upper trays. It was magic that worked, a miracle that could be repeated, but the invention for which Mary would be remembered forever was the simplest of all. So much so that people forget that someone had to invent it. The double boiler, known today in every kitchen around the world. A container with hot water in which another container is placed with the substance to be heated. The water never exceeds 100 degrees. The heat is uniform, gentle, controllable. Before the double boiler, heating delicate substances was a gamble. Direct fire burned them, destroyed them, turned potential medicines into useless charcoal. The water bath between the fire and the substance allowed for slow, gradual, perfect transformations. Direct heat burned them, destroyed them, turning potential medicines into useless charcoal. The water bath interposed between the fire and the substance allowed for slow, gradual, perfect transformations, waxes that melted without burning, resins that softened without decomposing, extracts that concentrated without losing their volatile properties. Maria applied her inventions to the creation of medicines. She developed tinctures of a potency that traditional herbalists could not match. Her opium extracts relieved pain without plunging the patient into a dangerous stupor. Her mandrake preparations induced surgical sleep without the risk of death that the old methods entailed. She dosed with precision because her methods produced substances of known concentration. She also perfected the extraction of metals from plants because plants contain minerals, iron in spinach, calcium in nettles, magnesium in green leaves. Mary developed techniques to extract these minerals in forms that the body could easily absorb. She called them vegetable minerals, minerals that had passed through the plant's body and been transformed in the process. Maria's texts were copied for centuries, but her copyists, almost all of them men, gradually eliminated her name. They attributed her inventions to imaginary male teachers. They signed their own names to treatises that simply repeated what she had discovered. By the time the fire consumed the library, Maria's name had already begun to fade. But I knew her, I listened to her, I copied her original texts with her name intact, and when I fled the flames, her knowledge traveled with me. The bath that bears her name still heats substances in every laboratory in the world. Her legacy survives even when her story has been stolen. Maria, the Jewess, deserves to be remembered not only as an inventor, but as the mother of an alchemy that sought to heal, not enrich, to transform plants into medicines, not lead into gold. Chapter 12. The Lost Garden. Few know that the Library of Alexandria was not just buildings full of papyrus. Behind the walls of the museum, hidden from ordinary visitors, there was a garden, not an ornamental garden for the pleasure of the eyes, but a scientific garden, a living repository, where plants brought from all corners of the known world grew. We called it the Garden of 1,000 Leaves, and its destruction was a loss that still keeps me awake when the night is too quiet. The garden had been founded by the first Ptolemies, who understood that knowledge could not be limited to words on papyrus. Plants had to be studied alive, observed as they grew, compared with each other under identical conditions. A text could describe a medicinal herb, but only the garden allowed you to see it, touch it, smell it, and test its effects directly. There were sections dedicated to each region of the world, an Egyptian corner where papyrus and lotus grew alongside Nile mandrake, a Greek area with all the herbs that Dioscorides had documented, and a Persian section with 100 petal roses and spices that perfumed the air from meters away. An Indian garden where plants that had traveled for months in caravans survived, protected from the sun and cold by merchants who knew their value. Each plant had a clay tablet next to its base. It recorded its name in all known languages, its place of origin, its documented medicinal uses, the preparations that worked and those that had failed. It was a living library that complemented the papyrus library. One made no complete sense without the other. The gardeners of the museum were as respected as librarians. They dedicated their lives to keeping alive plants that should not have survived in the climate of Alexandria. They built shade structures for those that needed it and kept the soil moist for those that needed it. They watered the plants daily and tended to them with the utmost care. The gardeners of the museum were as respected as the librarians. They dedicated their lives to keeping alive plants that should not have survived in the climate of Alexandria. They built shade for those that needed darkness, irrigation systems for those that required constant humidity, and protection from the salty sea wind for the most delicate ones. Each plant was a treasure that had taken years to obtain. I remember the section that fascinated me the most. They called it the corner of poisons. There grew the most dangerous plants known to man. Hemlock, which had killed Socrates; aconite, which paralyzed the heart in minutes; belladonna, which dilated the pupils to the point of blindness. But there were also plants that, in the right doses, became the most powerful medicines. Poison and remedy were the same plant, only the dose separated them. The doctors of Alexandria studied these plants to find the right balance. The gardeners of the museum were as respected as the librarians. They dedicated their lives to keeping alive plants that should not survive in Alexandria's climate. They built shade for those that needed darkness, irrigation systems for those that required constant moisture, and protection from the salty sea wind for the most delicate ones. Each plant was a treasure that had taken years to obtain. I remember the section that fascinated me the most. They called it the corner of poisons. There grew the most dangerous plants known to man. Hemlock, which had killed Socrates; aconite, which paralyzed the heart in minutes; belladonna, which dilated the pupils to the point of blindness. But there were also plants that, in the right doses, became the most powerful medicines. Poison and remedy were the same plant. But there were also plants that, in the right doses, became the most powerful medicines. The poison and the remedy were the same plant, only the dose separated them. The doctors of Alexandria studied these plants with reverence and terror. They learned to prepare anesthetics that made otherwise impossible surgeries possible. They developed antidotes for poisonings that were once death sentences. The poison garden was the place where the most dangerous plants were grown. They learned to prepare anesthetics that allowed surgeries that would otherwise have been impossible. They developed antidotes for poisonings that were once death sentences. The poison garden was the most dangerous and most valuable place in the entire complex. When the flames began, the Roman soldiers did not distinguish between buildings. The fire that consumed the papyrus jumped to the gardens. The dry plants of the summer burned like tinder. Trees that had taken decades to grow became torches. The irrigation systems were not designed to fight fires. In a single night, 1,000 years of botanical collection were turned to ash. Some gardeners tried to save what they could. I saw them running with pots in their arms, smoke burning their lungs. A few managed to rescue seeds, cuttings, roots wrapped in damp cloth, but most of the plants were unique. Specimens that existed nowhere else, species that explorers had found in remote valleys, and would never be found again. The Romans did not understand what they were destroying. To them, it was just another garden, herbs that would grow anywhere. They did not understand that some of those plants contained cures for diseases that would continue to kill for centuries. That the studies interrupted that night could have saved millions of lives. That they were burning possibilities that would never exist again. I escaped with papyrus, memorized formulas, saved knowledge in the form of words, but the plants themselves were lost, and with them secrets that no text can fully convey. The exact color of a flower that indicated its optimal maturity, the aroma that distinguished a healing variety from its poisonous cousin, the texture of a leaf that revealed whether it had been harvested at the right time. This manuscript that I now finish is my attempt to preserve what I can. Words that describe plants that no longer exist. Formulas that require ingredients that have become legendary. Instructions for preparations that few will be able to complete, but words travel, words survive, words can awaken in someone centuries later the desire to search for what was lost, to rediscover what was destroyed, to plant new gardens where ancient knowledge can flourish again. If these words have found you, then the fire did not win completely. Something survived. Something now travels from my mind to yours. And perhaps you can do what I can no longer do. Continue the search, recover what was lost, plant seeds of knowledge that will bear fruit that I will never see. The lost garden of Alexandria can be reborn not in a physical place, but in the collective memory of those who understand that. Plants are more than decoration, they are medicine, they are history, they are the bridge between the earth and the human body. This is my legacy. These are my seeds. Plant them.